In this tutorial we're going to have a look at warping full-length audio tracks with a varying tempo. So basically anything that doesn't have an electronic way of timekeeping, like a drum machine or a click track or anything like that. So it's been played by a real drummer, so there'll be kind of natural human variations in tempo. Now, as we saw in the last tutorial, in a lot of the cases you can still use that same method of setting the first beat of the first bar and then warping from here, and a lot of the time it'll get it pretty close that way still. But you might need to just fine tune it a bit, and what we're going to do is basically, as well as telling it where the first beat of the first bar should go, we're also going to say where the first beat of the third bar should go, and maybe do it in 2-bar chunks like that. And that might take a little bit longer than it would just to set that first bar, but you only have to do it once, and then when you're done you can press the save button down here so that every time you load that clip into a set it'll keep all those warp settings. For this example I've used a drum kit recorded with a room mic, mainly for copyright reasons because most of the tracks I have are electronic and have that constant tempo, so I don't really have any examples that I can use. But this is a good example anyway, because most of the time you would probably want to warp to the drums because they're the best way of marking where the beats and bars should go. So in the example we used in the last tutorial and are going to use in this tutorial, we use the kick drum as that main kind of marker. So let's just have a listen to what we've got here. So all of this we can see at the start just by looking at the waveform that that's kind of not really where the main meat of the loop is. So let's just skip forward. So really where that kick and crash goes, that is the first beat of the first bar. You can see after that fill. So what we're going to do is, you can see there's already a transient marker there. Just going to double click on that, set 1 here, and then warp from here. So we didn't need warp from here straight this time because we don't expect it to be straight, and we don't want any of these other options really. So if we try that now, it's actually not too far off, but what it seems to have done is calculated the tempo as double of what it should be, because this is quite a slow loop. It's definitely not 143 BPM. So what we can do is try just pressing this button here, and that will halve the tempo. And we can see how it goes there now. It's actually not done too bad a job. You can hear it's also pitched up quite a bit. That's to do with the warp mode that we have chosen here. We're in repitch mode. Don't worry about that for the moment. We'll look at that in a separate tutorial. But you can see it's also moved the first bar marker there. So we'll just have to set 1 here again. And so now all we want to do is really, we're going to do it in a 2-bar loop, as I said, because if we play sort of the transition between bar 1 and bar 2, play that, you can see there's not a kick drum on the first beat. It's kind of, there's a slight syncopation there. So it'll be just easier to work in 2-bar loops. And you can see bar 3 actually should start with that beat, and it's only slightly off, but it's still off, so we need to fix that. So let's double click on this one here to delete it before we do anything, and in fact we're going to go through and delete all of these warp markers as well, the ones Live's created. So select the first one, then hold the shift key, and that's on Mac and PC, then select the last one too and press the delete key. The reason we're doing that is because if we drag the transient marker without turning it into a warp marker first, what it will do is it'll correct the overall tempo of the whole file to the right of the last warp marker. If there's a warp marker later on, then it'll only correct that tempo between these 2 warp markers. So basically by getting rid of all of these warp markers and having none to the right of bar 1 here, it means that we can basically correct the whole tempo of that file in one go just by dragging the transients. And sometimes that will mean that you actually don't need to create any more warp markers because you're kind of fine-tuning the tempo and getting it right. You can see it's already pretty close. So just by dragging that and moving it onto the start of the bar, Now we can create that warp marker to lock it into place. You can see that we've got a nice neat 2-bar loop here. So if we just select between those 2 points and then Command L or Control L on PC, and then if we play that back, then you can see that loops nicely. So now what we want to do is basically skip forward and do the same thing. So there's a nice easy way of navigating around in an audio file like that, and that's just to select the loop brace here, and then we can use the up and down arrow keys on the computer keyboard. And up will move it forward, and it will keep that bar length, that loop length, which makes it very handy for doing this. So we'll just skip it forward 2 bars and try that. And you can see the first kick of bar 5 there. It's just slightly late. So we'll do the same again, drag the transient marker without turning it into a warp marker, then double click on it to create that warp marker, and so on. You just basically skip through, keep doing the same thing. This time I think it's slightly early here. So we'll just make that slightly later, double click, and so on. Now you may notice that some of the other kind of beats inside the loop, like snares and other kick drums, are slightly late or off, and that I'm not worrying about those. Now the reason being that they're what really give the natural feel or groove. Basically that's the drummer playing, so those slight delays in the notes is what gives it that feel. So we don't want to really interfere with that too much, or at least I don't. You can do, if you want to sort of tighten it up and make it more quantized, you can just go through and correct all of those. But what I would do is still go through and do it in loops of maybe 2 bars, or if you can get away with it, 4 bars or even 8 or 16. Basically whatever sections of bars that you can get away with without having to be completely sort of falling over yourself trying to warp it. The reason I keep it to shorter lengths is because it's easier to keep tabs of where you are, just because it's easy to keep track of a 2-bar loop than it is a 16-bar loop. So basically I would probably try and use a shorter loop and go through and just warp the loops first, and that's because once you've done that, then you can go inside the loop and you can fine tune just by dragging these beats around just a little bit without influencing the size of the loop. So that's the way I'd go through and do it. And also, as of Live 8, there's now the option to quantize audio, so you can just select it and Command U or Control U on PC, and Command Shift U if you want to have this settings options box here, and that will quantize it to your quantize settings and make it much more precise. But like I said, personally I wouldn't do that because you don't want to take away that natural groove of the drummer. Most of the time that's why you have a real drummer. You want their natural feel. Otherwise you could just use a drum machine or sequence it yourself. And then once you've done that and gone through and warped it right to the end, you can just, as I said before, press the save button so you can save it for next time you load it in. Then if you're wanting to keep any of this before bar 1, such as this fill or so on, then all I do is select the 3 warp markers that are here, or however many there are, holding the shift key so that you can select them all at once, then hit the delete key just to delete them. And then what you can do is do the same again, hold the shift key to select them all. You only need to select the first and last if you hold shift. And that way you can just now drag it around, and you see it will keep everything in the right position. So more than likely you'll find that loop is now in time. So near enough, but you can go through and fix that if it's a problem. Okay, well that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.